Awesome. Welcome to the Smooth Brain Society, everyone. We're recording in December, but this will go out in the new year. So happy New Year, everyone. Hope everybody had a good holiday. Hope you two have a good holiday in a bit. But yeah, we've got a really cool episode for you guys. So with me, we have Dr. Karaitiana Taiuru, and Finn Johnson. Finn was on previously, if you remember, a few episodes ago now, wasn't it? Around this time last year, speaking about ancestry. So he's back on, and I'll just introduce a little bit of Dr. Tayuru's resume, and then we can get into it. So he is the leading authority on Maori technology. So he's a Maori technology ethicist specializing in Maori rights with artificial intelligence, Maori data sovereignty, and governance with emerging digital technologies and biological sciences. Has a PhD in Tikanga Maori sovereignty with genetic research, and I've been going through the CV and has had multiple roles and has had multiple different in directorial roles and advisory roles across the board, including being part of the Office of the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisory, which is an advisory committee on artificial intelligence. I will let him introduce himself and then go through some of all his other accomplishments, and hopefully we can take the conversation from there. So welcome to the Smooth Society, Finn and Karatiana.
Thank you.
So, should we start with Dr. Karatiana's history then? If you could give us a little journey into how you got into data sovereignty and this kind of work, it would be great.
Sure. So I guess it started when I was, as a child, before I went to school. I was brought up with grandparents and a generation that were fighting for Māori rights, for recognition of loss of language, recognition of loss of our culture and our lands. So I was always, I guess, quite passionate about social justice from a young age. And then as an adult, I got into the IT industry at a time when it was still new and you couldn't go to university for an IT degree. It was on-the-job training. And one of my first role was a language revitalisation project of the Māori language. And so, I stayed in IT and, still there now. So a number of things I noticed was that IT was actually inherently racist and didn't care about our cultural rights. And Māori didn't have a voice in the IT industry. So I skilled up and become experienced in data, networking, internet, and then internet governance. And then I guess after internationally, we had Indigenous data sovereignty coming out of the United Nations rights to the Declaration. The United Nations rights to the Declaration of I hope you can edit the sound. The UNDRIP, recognising Indigenous people's rights. And then a few years later, academia in New Zealand started talking about Māori data sovereignty. And so, I've basically taken it from there and progressed, raising rights and promotion and education in Māori data sovereignty, while also keeping an eye out at the international level of Indigenous rights, particularly in America, Canada, Australia, and the Pacific Islands.
Excellent. For people who have no real idea, how is Maori data sovereignty or like Maori data any different, or data sovereignty any different from how we would kind of contextualize it in a standard Western idea or the general prevalence idea of what data sovereignty is?
Sure. So I guess the first thing to be aware of is that data is the new oil. It's a commodity that conglomerates, that they buy it, they trade it. It's the new economy. So from a Māori perspective, and unique to many other Indigenous peoples in the world, New Zealand has a constitutional document called Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi. So in that constitutional document, it recognises that Māori have sovereignty over what they call their treasure or their taonga. So we argued, so Māori argued that data is a treasure, it's our taonga, and like anything in the physical world, Māori data has a spiritual connection to Māori, as well as an economic connection. So therefore, we've argued this in the tribunal, in the Waitangi Tribunal, which is a tribunal that recognises any breaches by the government to do with our constitutional documents. So in that tribunal, we argued that Māori data is a treasure and subject to Māori governance as per our constitutional documents. The tribunal ruled in our favour and did recognise that Māori data is a treasure and is subject to Māori data governance and Māori sovereignty.
Interesting. And this is very unique to New Zealand, Aotearoa, isn't it? There is no such thing, because you did mention that you also work with American Indigenous rights, Australian, and so on. Is there something similar across the board? Is this thing very specific to...
Yeah, so Indigenous rights with data is common around the world. In my personal opinion, I just believe that Māori are more... we've advanced it more because of our constitutional rights. Other Indigenous peoples have constitutions with their governments, but their governments have never recognised those constitutions, and sometimes don't even recognise the Indigenous peoples, in fact. So we're very privileged in that fact. And we're also very privileged in the fact we have a tribunal that we can hold our government account to with any breaches of that constitution.
Nice. So then if we move to your work with artificial intelligence, how do these two align? How do these two integrate with each other?
Sure. So any use of artificial intelligence either requires existing data or will create new data. So if an AI is going to use Māori data, then the AI is subject to Māori data sovereignty rights. We also know that minorities, Indigenous peoples, minorities, women, are all subject to bias and discrimination with artificial intelligence. And so that is usually because the data is biased and the engineers and the companies are biased. And there's multiple examples of different communities being discriminated against. So my role is essentially making sure that Māori don't become discriminated against further. And a lot of Māori fear artificial intelligence. They fear that we might be damaged, we might suffer more abuse, more discrimination. So I argue that we're at a crossroads where we can just sit back and not do anything with artificial intelligence, and yes, we will become more and more colonised and more discriminated against. Or we can actually say, no, this is our opportunity to decolonise the last 250 years of colonisation and empower Māori people. And so that's essentially, my primary role is to ensure that our constitutional agreements are adhered to with artificial intelligence, that UNDRIP is recognised, and New Zealand has a number of different pieces of legislation that protect human rights. So making sure that those human rights are recognised as well. But then also encouraging and working with different industries to use artificial intelligence as a tool of empowerment, both for the organisation and for minorities, and especially for Māori. So one example could be the legal system. We know that Māori are disproportionately convicted of crimes, the same crimes that non-Māori get a warning for. So if we use the right data with an artificial intelligence system, we could see AI not seeing a person being Māori or non-Māori or Pacifica, etc., and just see the facts. And in my opinion, that would make the justice system a lot more fairer. And this could be applied to social services, right across the board.
Yeah. Um, okay. Okay. See, that's an example of kind of making a system unbiased, which you just gave. What kind of bias data are we talking about here? Could you give us an example of that? Uh,
Sure. So if you just look at, say, statistical data, it'll show that Māori are, without knowing the background, Māori are more likely to be criminals. But it's not because we're more likely to be criminals. It's because we've had bias in the justice system. And so if you delve further into those statistics, you'll see Māori are more likely to be imprisoned for an imprisonable offence than non-Māori. So one example could be driving without a seatbelt, for example, at speed. If that's punishable by imprisonment, Māori will more than likely be imprisoned than non-Māori. The health system is very biased, and we've had the tribunal has recognised the racism and bias in our health system. So without that research, you could just look at the health data and say, gosh, Māori are really, really unhealthy people. But it's not because we're unhealthy. It's because we don't have access to the health system. Our genetic makeup doesn't suit a lot of the medicines, like heart disease is a good example. There's research that shows that the main medications don't work with Māori and Pacifica peoples. That's probably two examples off the top of my head.
I like that. I like the healthcare example a lot because we relate to it personally. So my mother is a geneticist, and we have discussions a lot around this a lot. And the thing that a lot of drugs only work on about 33 to 40% of the population in the correct dose, and a lot of times they're made by Western drug companies tested mainly on a certain type of population, so they never really translate well to other countries as well. And that means that even if they're even removing all the other potential bias in terms of diagnosis and treatment times and so on, once you actually get the treatment, it's less likely to be effective.
Mm-hmm.
And how would you then use AI as a tool to kind of avert this sort of situation?
Sure. So with the healthcare, for example, I see. Well, talking about genetics, so I think first of all, we'd need trust in Māori society for Māori or Indigenous, genome banks would be a good start, and then using AI to actually, figure out if the medicine works or not would be one example. Using AI for diagnosis of patients. So we already know that many Māori don't want to see a doctor or a health professional because they either can't express their feelings properly. Maybe it's because they've already experienced racism and bias with a health professional in the past. They can't access a professional. They can't afford to see a health professional. I see AI removing many of those physical barriers. We see, and research again has shown this, that health professionals' notes can be biased, where AI can look at that and pick up biases if trained, and the data's right, and algorithms have been checked for biases. So I think those are all things that help. It also stops people from in the rural communities have to travel to cities, and all of those extra economic and physical access issues could be changed with AI. The statistics so AI could also pick up that our health research usually doesn't fairly represent the Māori population. I worked in health for 18 months at a university, and all of the research for decades and decades of the research that I read never fairly represented the Māori population. So the Māori population is about 16.5 to 18% of the country. The health research I looked at only had about 6% Māori representation. So I think, AI could certainly help in that area. Hopefully it could help improve synthetic data. So when there's not enough Māori participants, statisticians will create data based on, I'm not sure exactly how they do it, but they come up with a solution to fill the gaps in, and that's called synthetic data. So I see that AI could create that synthetic data without bias and perhaps, remove some of those inequities.
Thanks, Sahid. I just want to jump in with a question. Karaitiana, you made a really interesting point a bit earlier on talking about decolonizing AI. And I thought that was a really interesting idea. I was wondering if you could please speak a bit more about what that might look like and how that technically could play out.
Sure. So we know typically the engineers who create AI are typically middle-aged, middle income to higher income white males or older. And we already know that they create AI systems based on what they think is normal. And so a really good example would be, I can give you two good examples actually. So Amazon had an AI recruitment system. And so basically it rejected all women. If you were a female, you were automatically taken off the list because the men who created that system created it to favour what they look like and their qualifications. And so by decolonising an AI system would involve working with Māori and other Indigenous peoples and minorities, and actually finding these discrepancies and then rewriting them to be more fairer. Another example was Google Images. AI would tag images to what they thought the image was, and people of colour were being tagged as being apes and gorillas instead of people of colour, simply because again, white engineers, male engineers who didn't think about people of colour when they were creating the system.
No, I've heard of both of these examples, and they're both really bad ones. But because I will harken back to how we met. So we met at this science communications conference, and after you gave the keynote speech, there was a panel on artificial intelligence, and I spoke to Simon McLean, who hopefully will come on at some point, and he was talking about introducing bias in a system to sort of counter current biases which we have in the real world can also cause issues. So how would you sort of balance those two out? Like how do we deal with these issues where people are clearly creating biased systems because it's made on biased data, but how do we counter it in a productive way to make it better?
Sure. So I think this is an opportunity for new employment, and this could be an opportunity for people who lose their jobs because of AI to be trained up and to look at biased data, to identify it, and then remove the biased data. I'm not familiar of any roles that are already created doing that, but there's certainly an opportunity there. Algorithms are another good opportunity to look at and to remove the biases. And so these roles don't necessarily have to be for highly technical people. They can be with people with social and cultural skills. So one example is an algorithm. So an algorithm could be used to point out a high-risk student at high school. And I've seen this example before, where the algorithm said, if a student leaves high school at 16, came from a single-parent family, and is Māori, who doesn't go to employment after school, is at high risk of becoming a criminal. So I flip that around, and I say, well, what happens if that student is immersed in their own culture, left school early because we know that the education system doesn't cater for Māori and Indigenous views, and that individual then went back to their Indigenous communities to learn and to become a leader, a cultural leader with their own people. So, I mean, that's an example of an algorithm not recognizing a cultural difference, and that's a bias. So if that algorithm was reviewed by Māori or a specific position, that bias would have been picked up really quickly.
So you said you didn't know of any example where this kind of thing is happening, where people are getting sort of jobs. Is there a push from what you know of to develop such things, and is there a likelihood of it happening in the near future? Because I guess the near future is when it needs to happen, right? You can't make it happen 10 years after AI has taken over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I mean, a lot of people are talking about the need. Sorry, in New Zealand, there's a high percentage of IT companies who believe that AI should both be regulated and that AI ethics is high on their priority list. So I think that's a good indication that, that our commercial companies are thinking like this. I've been to a number of conferences in the past year, and everybody recognizes that AI is not just about science and technical minds. It's about the ethics. It's about the human side. It's about culture. So I do believe that we will start seeing an increase in the ethical positions. I believe these positions will cover all minorities. And in New Zealand, I think we're a small enough country where we could implement this change reasonably quickly. And as I said before, with our constitutional documents, I think that's a good excuse to start creating these new positions.
That's nice. I had a question in my head and then it just blanked for a second. But this is, you just said in New Zealand we have this power and have this opportunity, but a lot of the major AI systems, so for example, OpenAI and ChatGPT, are from America.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work then? Because I am certain they've been trained on whatever data they found on the internet, including data which I assume would be considered Maori data.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you reconcile with that? How do you control international organizations? Where does this come in?
Yeah, sure. So I think again we're at the basically the genesis of AI being publicly used and becoming a household name. That with brave leadership and a creative government, we could start looking at how to regulate AI. I believe that we could use our constitutional agreements, our human rights legislation, and we've already set the precedent with free trade agreements, where we have our constitutional obligations to Māori, the Indigenous peoples, recognised in some trade agreements. And I also believe that instead of just focusing on Māori, we should probably start thinking about New Zealand sovereignty, and then just attach Māori sovereignty after that. Because there's a number of risks for New Zealand as a country just becoming becoming another part of American culture, I guess. So definitely by legislation and regulation. Then I think companies who use AI have a moral obligation to use AI that's socially responsible. And so, the more companies who also put pressure on AI developers for ethical AI will certainly start helping. I think probably New Zealand should probably be working in partnership with the Pacific Islands peoples, because they're small, we're small, but we'll have very similar values, and probably Australia as well. And I think that the more we can collaborate our countries together and really push for social change, I think there's the possibility for some change there. Just in my lifetime, I've seen society change. When I was brought up, it was a very misogynist sort of communities and lifestyles. Māori were treated very differently than we are now. Children were there to be seen and not heard. Corporate punishment was around. And so all of this has all changed over 40, 50 years. We've seen technology change at much more rapid pace. So I think as a community we can push for change, and change will happen.
I just wanted to jump in with another little question here for you, Karaitiana. You touched upon just then the sort of where New Zealand stands within that global framework and within that network of connections and that power. Talked about the trade agreements, and you also mentioned UNDRIP earlier on. And as we've seen those big, declarations and things that acknowledge, Indigenous rights, but aren't necessarily enforced on that large scale and aren't often put into effect. And so if there is this stuff that New Zealand Aotearoa talks about, our Māori data rights and data governance as being an important thing, how successful do you think it can be in actually being implemented while we're at the, at the hands or at the mercy of other major players in the Anglosphere who do and, kind of have that sort of power?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think it'll be an easy job, but yeah, I do believe that we can do it. And again, we're small enough as a country. We're small enough to kind of introduce new regulation. We have the big cloud providers wanting to come on shore. So again, I see there's an opportunity there for kind of pushing the issue that they should be ethical with their solutions, and they should be recognising our constitutional rights in New Zealand. I just think, and I strongly believe that more and more countries are going to start pushing for this as well. We've just seen, I think it was on Sunday, the EU talking about the AI Act. We already know that China have implemented changes for their own sovereignty with AI. We know Australia's shared concerns about their AI. I believe Japan have made a lot of work in this area. So we're not talking about something that other countries aren't talking about. It's just a matter of, those sort of partnerships and, aligning our values to other countries' values.
Do you think that people are being more proactive in terms of AI than what they were in terms of internet laws? Because I spoke to Dr. Andrew Lenson, who came on and spoke a little bit about just a basic overview of what artificial intelligence is and some ideas around the ethics. Mm-hmm. And he said a quote that New Zealand legislation has finally gotten up to speed with the internet just now. So do you think we'll be more proactive in terms of artificial intelligence? Oh.
I believe we will be. We have a new government who have made a number of commitments to artificial intelligence. They've been proactive in the AI communities. I think, ChatGPT in the last 12 months has become a household name. So people are a lot more aware of what can happen with artificial intelligence now. I think with the rise of activism in the world and in New Zealand, with the global wars, people are becoming more and more aware that AI is being used in those scenarios, and that anybody could be at risk of artificial intelligence. And innocent people who probably didn't even have an internet connection are being targeted by AI in different wars. So I think, I think everyone's a lot more aware. We've already, as you say, we've seen the damage the internet has done to our communities. We've seen the damage that social media has done, but I still don't think, as New Zealanders, I still don't think we've fully grasped what that damage is with social media. But I do believe we're a lot more aware, and changes should be a lot more quicker.
Sahi, do you mind if I derail us on another little tangent?
Go for it.
So, Karaitiana, you talk about, you do your work around Māori data sovereignty, Māori data governance. I was wondering if you could please speak to the future and what you see for iwi data governance and sovereignty and hapu data governance and sovereignty. With some of those critiques being around, do we want other Māori who from the other side of the country looking after and being responsible for our data, and kind of that localization. Can you please speak to that a little bit?
Yep, sure. So I think, traditionally, our Māori and iwi/community leaders have, kind of never grasped digital and technology and the benefits. But I believe that we're starting to, our leaders are recognizing the power and the economic returns of tech and digital now. I've already seen data sovereignty compliance systems being created by Indigenous peoples for Indigenous peoples. And I think the more our Māori understand the technology, understand the benefits and the detriments of data, we will start seeing more and more of our communities looking after their own data. There will become a time where will be hapu or clans and our tribes will be wanting their own data looked after by their own selves. But I think in the next 10, 15 years, we'll be more worried about just claiming sovereignty, worrying about leaving our data in New Zealand. I do know that some marae have their own networks, their own infrastructure to look after their own data. And I see that becoming more and more common and cheaper as well. I think, it used to cost tens and tens of thousands of dollars just for something really basic. Now I'm seeing it for about 70,000 for a really decent data sovereignty system at a rural community. I also think that it won't just be the digital data. I think at Māori, we're going to start thinking about our environment as well, where the knowledge that we have in our native species, in the environment, with global warming. And I think we're going to see more and more of our Māori communities saying, well, hang on, why does the New Zealand government have more knowledge about why the sea is rising and we have to move our land, our homes and our communities than we as the community who live here have? And so I think that'll also be a motivating fact to for more and more sovereignty with our clans and tribes.
I'm sorry, could you elaborate on that last point? Because from the example, by the sound of it, it sounded like improvement of data sharing as opposed to sovereignty. And is there a difference between the two? So, like you said, the New Zealand government knows more, or the example, New Zealand government knows more about sea rising levels and a certain environment than the clan in the area, for example, the iwi there. So would data sovereignty of the iwi then that kind of you speaking about the data, the iwi requiring being like we need more information about our own area. How come the government knows more about it than we do? Isn't that more for encouraging data sharing as opposed to data sovereignty statement?
Sure. So I think there's a common phrase here that the government know more about us than we know about ourselves. But I think you could call it sharing, or if Māori and tribes and clans have their own data in their own data ecosystem, and then using their own AI, that sort of sovereignty would be a lot more powerful than relying on, for example, 6 different government agencies who have our data, and then there's the common issue is we don't know what the government's got unless we ask, but we can't ask if we don't know. So if we have our sovereignty of our data, and as you say, and sharing of that data would help.
Okay, that makes it a lot clearer. Do you think there's also, so I know from history, generally speaking, Indigenous communities or minorities tend to have less of a trust in government for, of course, various reasons. Do you think then, as it stands on a New Zealand level, trusting the government to come up with certain legislation to, as you said, first have New Zealand data sovereignty, and then from there moving on to attaching on Māori data sovereignty, and then from there attaching on iwi data sovereignty? Do you think there's like quite a few there would be a few issues arising in that because you have to inherently put trust in government or in Western systems like the European Union set up to first make legislations to even get to that step. Do you think there'd be issues with that?
Yeah, there's definitely trust issues, but I think the important pathway would be to engage the government and Māori, engaging at the start, co-designing systems, co-designing what sovereignty looks like. And just in this current political environment, I don't think if we just ask for Māori sovereignty, I don't think it would get too much attention and buy-in. But again, I think as New Zealanders, if we look at our New Zealand data and what happens to our personal data, I think co-designing with Māori would be a really good start. Māori have got over 250 years of co-designing and of sovereignty issues, so we've got a really good idea of what we need and what we want and what will work. And another common saying is, "What's good for Māori is good for everybody." And so I definitely think, in terms of data sovereignty, that rule applies, that statement applies. But again, I think there will be trust issues. But then, saying this, our data already sits with the government anyway, so and our data is already all around the world. So, I think it's more a matter of trying to get it back and put some fences around it.
Yeah, in your opinion, what would the reclaiming of that data look like? In terms of, because I feel that would be a model for everybody else in them reclaiming their own data. So how would that look like?
Sure. So I think the first step would be bringing it back on shore. At the moment, a lot of the government data is in Australia and America, but bringing it back on shore, then setting up a New Zealand-owned cloud providers, and then having sovereign AI systems and sovereign cloud hosting services. Because we know that at this stage, if there's an American cloud provider in New Zealand, that they're still responsible to American laws if they're owned by an American company. So we need to look at having our own New Zealand-owned software infrastructure and companies. And I don't think that would be too hard. I mean, theoretically, as technically possible. It's just a matter of the investment and trying to get away from this fear that locally owned and locally run service providers, some people feel that they're not as good as an international cloud provider, which I don't think is always necessarily true.
I was wondering if, on that note, you could speak to what it kind of technically takes to have a local provider in that local infrastructure, and how that relates to, with the needs to have, backups, and how much water and natural resources it takes to maintain those. So sort of that tension between those aspirations and then looking after Papatuanuku and how we manage our water in the light of that.
Sure. There's a question I can't answer properly, but sorry. But no, you're right. I mean, cloud infrastructure does require huge amounts of water. It is damaging to the environment. But I think there's a case to be had where Indigenous peoples could do a cost-benefit analysis and an analysis on the environment of the benefits of locally hosting compared to hosting overseas. But I'm not an expert in that area. Sorry, but yeah.
I have a question which harkens back to what you spoke about, and I think both Finn and you can probably explain this better to give people a background, and then speak about how this would fit in with artificial intelligence. But I remember you talking about potential. So I'll go back. I'll start the question again, but by saying that the Whanganui River was given human rights a few years ago, and it was based on various values, various Indigenous values and knowledge and practices. Does that would that kind of be seen with AI models as well? So would AI models used with built on Maori data then also be subject to certain similar rights in the future?
Mm-hmm.
Of
Yes.
course, you would need to explain a bit more of the background and reasoning, because I don't.
Okay. Sure. Yep. So in New Zealand, with the New Zealand government has given legal personhood to a river, a national forest, and a mountain. And so that personhood was based on a number of factors of being important to Māori, spiritual connections, historical connections, etc. And so by giving legal personhood to those geographical locations means that those geographic locations have the same rights as a human being, an individual human being. So I have argued in the past that the same thing can be applied to artificial intelligence that uses Māori data. So I say that because one view of Māori data is that it has the life force or emoji of the individual or individuals that it's about, or the life force of the geographic locations that data is about. So then I argue that from a cultural perspective, that if the AI becomes sentient or has, or some people call hallucinations, and it starts saying that it is Māori because it has Māori data, and if it starts talking about recognizing that life force, then I think there's a real argument to be had, or a discussion to be had, about giving an AI legal personhood. Simply, because based on our traditional beliefs, it could be a person because of that life force. Again, I know from a Western science perspective, the argument is that it's only binary. It's just bits of data. It can't be sentient because there's no human element. But from a Māori perspective, and I know several other Indigenous communities have similar views. The AI system could have a life force of many individuals and geographic locations. I also think that in New Zealand, our highest court, the Supreme Court, ruled that Māori traditional laws are now New Zealand's first common law, and that those laws can be applied to both Māori and non-Māori. So I would further argue that because of that Supreme Court ruling, that yes, AI could be given legal personhood if it has Māori data.
That makes it very interesting, both in potential dystopian kind of ways and just a general idea of how you would interact or tackle such a model. If such a ruling were to say happen, what is stopping someone from making heavily biased models in one way or the other with Maori data, which could actually cause harm to Maori, and because it's got personhood, that you can't really do much about it.
So I think to grant legal personhood, so hypothetically, if an AI was using Maori data and the legal personhood discussion came up, that would have to be a discussion with the government and with Māori. So if the AI was heavily biased against Māori, I don't think there'd be no cooperation for the legal personhood. But then I'd also hope that by that stage we'd have regulation that would protect us against such biased systems that cause harm.
What are you thinking there, Finn?
Those are some really interesting questions, Sahid. You're talking about the personhood of the mountain, of the stream, and the forest. I think back to it being grounded in whakapapa, where we draw those ancestral genealogical links in the way that those specific landmarks have provided such physical and spiritual sustenance for the people who have lived there in a way that it's essential for the life of those peoples. And I guess I've never reflected upon, we look up the whakapapa chart, but what it actually means to look down the whakapapa chart and think about what that means and what will be in the future, given life and essential for the survival of our tamariki and mokopuna, our children, our grandchildren, our future generations, and considering things like, what if those sorts of models or or similar things are important and do play a big role, then how do you protect that too? Protect our people and ensure our continued flourishing. So that was a really interesting corridor, but just wanted to just throw that extra spanner in the works, Karaitiana, with talking about wairua, because of course we talk about for our international listeners, wairua is a very central cultural concept for Māori, which a lot of those religious translations will be around spirituality and the soul, but also referring to that level of interconnectedness between all things. And so for a lot of Māori, we see different aspects of the environment as having wairua. But I'm just wondering around AI, and although things can be imbued that Māori and can be of the life force of our Māori people, I wonder, how that relates to wairua, and if these models can have wairua, if it is inorganic and in that way. But really interesting stuff, and I'm so looking forward to listening to all the really great discussions and debates from our many Māori scholars and cultural leaders in this area.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. So one example is one of our traditional beliefs is if you take a photo of someone, that photo, that physical piece of paper with the photo has part of that person's spirit in the photo. So I liken that scenario to our data. And then I think if we look at the large language learning models, or something like ChatGPT, if that was only trained on the data of, say, a prominent Māori leader, where there's plenty of data and video and audio of, then if you have an AI only using that one set of data, that one data of one person, what if that AI then says, I am that person? I think that would cause some deep discussions in our communities, and there'd be some people who wouldn't want to argue with it, and there'd be others who will just say it's impossible because it's just digital data. So, but I do believe that Indigenous communities should, who believe in the life force being associated with things we touch and interact with, should perhaps start having that, start considering, what if. And I think it goes back to a data sovereignty issue again too, is what data do we actually want to share? What are the risks in the future? What could happen to our data? Is it possible we have a robot that looks like one of our dead ancestors that's trained on a LLM that can, interact like our dead ancestor could? I think there's a number of cultural discussions to be had, which I don't know if we're ready to have those discussions, but I think they need to occur.
I also think that's a very general discussion to have, right? In the sense you could, in theory, train an entire model based on pictures and images of any historical figure, or I guess pick like John Kennedy or any former prime minister. And then if that AI model starts acting, behaving, pretending like that person, are we then listening to it as if it's their own thoughts or based on some knowledge which we input? And
I think that's a good discussion point.
I think because I know you have to leave soon, but I wanted to spend the last little bit discussing your research. So you are a Kapapa Māori researcher. So could we talk a little bit about what your specific research interests are and what you currently are doing in that field?
Yep. Okay. So yeah. Okay. So yeah. So yeah. Where do I start? Where do you start? So yeah. So I guess yeah. My current research interests are in applying cultural values and listening, going out to the communities and talking to people who don't necessarily have a computer or cell phone reception, and just trying to get their values, what their values of artificial intelligence and robotics are, and then trying to create an ethical model for artificial intelligence based on Māori cultural values. And so so that's my primary research focus at the moment. I have just recently finished research into applying cultural values in a Māori health setting, views again of the communities of how to apply cultural values to health, and then through technologies. That's where I'm at this stage. So.
So the research which you just finished on health, how did that work? So what were kind of your findings from it? Yeah.
Sure. Yep. There's a lot of mistrust, about the health system. Many Māori that I spoke to would prefer not to deal with a human that actually trust an AI more than a human. If it was trained on non-biased data, if it was proven to be culturally safe, they'd prefer that than, So basically it's just a lot of actually going out into communities, talking to people, not doing the traditional academic style where you just kind of turn up, want to interview people, then disappear again, but actually just creating those long-term relationships and being part of the community helps. So as Kaupapa Māori researchers, this is what we do, right? We create relationships and leave a lot of those formalities behind. And I know that many Māori that I speak to don't want to be recorded, so it's a lot of note taking, trying to identify trends and patterns, attending functions, making the most of informal discussions. Talking to a wide range of people certainly helps. So I've noticed that the younger generation, so say teenagers up to late 20s, are much more aware of technology and the biases. But they're also got really great imaginations where they talk about killer robots and killer drones, and they really fear that the discrimination they face with the New Zealand police, for example, could be enhanced by these technologies. And so it's a matter of trying to say, well, we're not at that stage yet. The AI we're not up there quite yet, and especially in New Zealand. But then trying to talk about the benefits of the communities, and also not we can talk about AI in a very scientific and technical manner, where the communities I go to, I talk about it using our traditional knowledge stories, some of our deities, try and relate it back to something that our communities are familiar with, as opposed to opposed to the technical way of doing it, talking about it. So was that the question? Did I answer the question?
Well, I've got want to jump in on that. And the question is, Karaitiana, you're in front of a lecture theatre full of a whole bunch of 500 young Māori software engineering students who are all really interested in how they can improve AI for Māori, how they can decolonize it, or how they can indigenize it for Māori. Mm-hmm. Which Māori value do you think is the most important to bring to those tables when having these discussions and getting this work done?
Oh, that's another really tough question. Probably Maybe rangatiratanga. I mean, just think about our flags in the background. So the international audience, the flags in both our backgrounds represent tino rangatiratanga, or self-sovereignty, and governorship, etc., etc. And so I think, but also, to be honest, I mean, I've had quite a few interactions with the younger Māori who've gone through the full immersion language schools, and they are really, really staunch in the culture. And they just, and they almost say to me, they say, well, but why are you taking so long doing this? Why are you not doing this? And they're really assertive. And, I strongly believe they should be our leaders today, because they're just, they're way different than us. And I'll say, if we had 500 Māori software students in a lecture room, I'd be really happy. And I guess, my key value, I would just say, use all of our tikanga, use all of our customary practices, and just be really assertive. Don't be shy. Just speak your mind, and make sure that our cultural practices and values are understood and embedded in all of your work. I think and just ensuring equity, not just for Māori, but for all people. Whether it's women, minority groups, religious groups, or other race cultures.
I think that can be captured very nicely, all in the simple phrase of tu rangatira, stand tall in your chiefliness, and take and carry all of that with you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
I think that's a very good place to end on that statement, on a good hope for the future. Hopefully, that's the other thing. You have people in power who have no clue barely know what the internet is, let alone what AI is.
Mm-hmm.
So, or how it works, making decisions, which does not help. So hopefully, the more youth come through, the more faster we can bring about positive change. But thank you so much, Karaitiana, for coming on.
Awesome.
Thank you again, Finn. It's good to have both of you. Hopefully we can keep having more conversations. Hopefully we get more people want to talk about artificial intelligence in the future. I'm trying to get people on to talk about the more neural network side of it as well. But genetic data and data sovereignty in general is a big thing, and it's only getting bigger. And who holds it? And I look forward to see what the New Zealand government can come up with, and hopefully the change comes sooner rather than later, and people are protected by it. So thank you so much. Doctor, we have one last thing. If you could give people a piece of advice, all our listeners, one piece of advice to leave with, what would it be?
No pressure. Go on. I think you just be kind and treat everybody the same way you want to be treated. And we're all humans, and we all live on this planet. So let's look after the planet and look after each other.
Wow. Very nice. Perfect. Oh, thank you everyone for listening. I need to if Doctor and Finn could just stay on for like a minute, but thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch you guys in the next one. Okay, bye.